56 Days kicks off with a scene that is straight out of a nightmare, as a masked man creeps into an apartment and finds a body that has been sitting in a bathtub for way too long. He doesn't call the cops, though. He just takes a quick photo for the road, pulls the fire alarm, and vanishes into the shadows. This leaves detectives Lee and Carl to deal with the literal mess. Then the clock rewinds 56 days to show us how we got here. We meet Ciara Wise at the supermarket, where this guy, Oliver, is basically burning a hole in her back with his eyes. Eventually, he works up the nerve to talk to her. He claims he is an architect who just moved to town, which is funny because Ciara says the exact same thing. They hit it off easily, exchange numbers, and Oliver invites her to a movie. Before the film, they grab a pre-game drink at a restaurant, where Oliver's cover story immediately starts to crumble. He told Ciara he has never been there before, but the staff treats him like a local celebrity. He eventually cracks, admitting he sometimes lies for no reason when he's nervous, and suggests they start fresh. Fair enough. But then things get stranger. He slips off to the bathroom and makes a frantic call to a psychotherapist, leaving an agitated voicemail when he or she doesn't pick up. A woman in the bathroom witnesses his little meltdown. By the time Oliver returns to the table, they've missed the movie, so they share a kiss and call it a night. That same woman later tries to warn Ciara that this guy is bad news, but Ciara just shrugs it off and claims they are old classmates, which makes you wonder if she is actually okay, or if she is just blinded by a handsome face. The movie finally happens after a reschedule, and they even go for a simulated skydiving session before ending up back at Oliver's place, which we now recognize as the future crime scene. Up until this point, the show really wants us to think Oliver is the one to watch because he is using a fake ID and acting like a total sketchball. Then the camera follows Ciara back to her rundown apartment, where we see her practicing her lines in the mirror and looking through a collection of fake identities. It turns out her chance meeting with Oliver at the supermarket was a total setup that she spent weeks preparing for. Now that the detectives have a warrant to enter that apartment in the future, the big question isn't just who died, but who actually pulled the trigger. The show wants you to think the guy is the predator, but after seeing Ciara's secret life, it feels like she might have been the one hunting him all along. Like any reasonable person would, Oliver looks Ciara up online after their first encounter and finds almost nothing, just a freshly created LinkedIn profile. We get a clearer picture of Ciara's motive when we realize that during her first visit to Oliver's place, she took pictures of his home safe, and her entire plan is built around getting access to his money. To move things along, she texts Oliver suggesting lunch. Over the meal, she starts probing, asking why he only uses cash. Oliver, paranoid about being tracked, explains that credit cards leave a paper trail. Ciara is essentially asking him where his money is while making it sound like casual conversation, but Oliver fires back, asking why she has no social media presence. She spins a story about someone stealing her sister's identity online, which made her scrub everything. Even so, Oliver's instincts are nagging at him. He suspects she's hiding something and asks to come see her apartment. Ciara rushes home to hide her numerous fake IDs, then deliberately moves a bunch of bugs into a visible spot just before he arrives. When Oliver shows up and notices the bugs, she triggers a preset alarm disguised as a phone call, her landlord apparently, telling her the building needs renovation and she'll have to vacate for 3 weeks. Oliver, being the gentleman he is, invites her to stay with him until it's sorted. And just like that, Ciara is exactly where she wants to be. But her motive might not be purely about money. In a call to her mom, we learn that the family home is about to be sold if they can't raise enough money by the end of the month. Ciara promises her mother she's working on it, and that she's going to make the people who did them wrong finally pay. All signs point to Oliver being that person. Ciara didn't randomly bump into Oliver at that supermarket. She knew exactly who he was. His real name is Oliver St. Ledger, son of a wealthy family. We thought he was suspicious because he had multiple IDs. Now we know why. He came to Boston under a fake identity to escape something terrible he did in his past, but whatever he did has followed him, because he receives an envelope addressed to Oliver St. Ledger, sent by someone who knows exactly where he is. When his psychotherapist finally picks up and Oliver tells him about the envelope, he warns him that since the only new variable in his life is Ciara, he should cut her off. But Oliver is already falling for her, so he lets her move in anyway. Oliver is so haunted by his past that he can't sleep without injecting himself with heavy sedatives. He waits for Ciara to drift off before taking his hit. But the joke is on him, because the moment he's out cold, Ciara gets up, walks to the safe, and starts working through a list of possible passcodes she prepared in advance. Back in the present, detectives Lee and Carl are still piecing things together. They can't yet identify the body, but they've traced the apartment lease to Oliver St. Ledger. When they go to speak to his boss, Elliot Burhane, who hired Oliver partly on the strength of his late father's connections, Carl comes in having done his homework. He confronts Elliot directly, making clear that the man he hired as Oliver Kennedy is not who he claimed to be. He also accuses Elliot of lying about his wife's death, and Elliot storms off in a huff, Ciara wakes Oliver up and confronts him about the sedative. He reveals his doctor has been prescribing him propofol for a severe case of insomnia rooted in anxiety. He sometimes goes days without sleeping, and after a while he can no longer tell the difference between reality and hallucination, so at intervals he uses propofol just to sleep and stay sane. Ciara tries to understand why he's so anxious that he has to live like this, but Oliver manages to change the subject because he's already late for work. The moment he grabs his phone though, Ciara clocks his passcode. The one she tried on the vault didn't work, so it's safe to assume she'll be trying this one next. Oliver aces his presentation at work, and Elliot treats him less like an employee and more like a son. Detective Lee figures this out in the present too. After storming off from his confrontation with the detectives, Elliot tells them to leave Ollie alone. He went from Oliver to Ollie, which tells Lee the man knows more than he is letting on about Oliver, but she can't really do anything as they get a message to back off from his lawyer. Oliver then shows up at Ciara's workplace as a surprise, except it isn't really her workplace. She's claimed she works there, but she doesn't have a job. To make things worse, Jane, the red-haired woman who tried to warn Ciara about Oliver earlier, is standing right outside. Oliver doesn't recognize her, but Ciara does. The moment he leaves, she tells her to stay away, then walks into the building and slips out the back. Luckily for her, when Oliver shows up at closing time, she's made it back just in time, though she takes a tumble rushing through the lobby. Oliver lightens the mood by embarrassing himself right alongside her and whisking her away before it gets any more awkward. In the car, Ciara gushes over what Oliver is driving, and he reveals it belongs to Elliot. He explains that Elliot and his father were Princeton classmates, and that Elliot harbored romantic feelings for his father, feelings his father was aware of but tactfully ignored. Elliot transferred all of that affection onto Oliver, treating him like a son and even setting him up in the apartment he's currently living in. Ciara opens up about how poor her family is, and Oliver assures her she will never go back to that life. They make out in the car long enough to cause a traffic jam. When they get back to the apartment, Ciara offers to cook as a thank you for letting her stay, but Oliver won't hear of it. She's a guest, and he'll be cooking for her. They're genuinely sweet to watch together, which is exactly what makes it so uncomfortable knowing what's really going on between them. While cooking, Oliver checks his mail and finds another envelope addressed to Ollie St. Ledger, this time containing nothing but a number. He starts spiraling. He's out of propofol, and too wound up to sleep, so he goes to see his psychotherapist in person, and notices Jane is following him. He tells his therapist that someone seems to know what he did, and is haunting him. When he mentions the red-haired woman tailing him, his therapist assumes he's hallucinating. His ex was also a redhead, but either way, he sends him home with more propofol. While Oliver is at his session, Ciara gets to work. Using the mailing address on his accounts, she tries to move $10K from Oliver's trust fund by impersonating his mother, but the funds can't be touched until they mature in April. She then tries his phone passcode on the safe. Still nothing. Oliver arrives home and nearly catches her in the act, but she distracts him by undressing, and just like that, the moment passes. We get some answers to why Ciara said the St. Ledgers owe them from a phone call with her sister. Their brother is dead, and all signs point to Oliver being responsible. When her sister hears about her plan to make money off Oliver, her sister warns her not to do anything stupid. What makes it even more layered is that earlier, while Oliver was busy cooking and distracted by the envelope, Ciara had been wearing her dead brother's jersey right in front of him, possibly to rattle him, and he didn't even notice. In the present, detectives Lee and Carl find a silver stud earring in the decomposed remains, which strongly suggests the body belongs to Ciara. She was seen wearing it earlier. Detective Lee's skeletons are also starting to crawl out, as it emerges that the man Carl spotted her with is Linus Finch, a low-level drug dealer, not a witness as she claimed. When Carl confronts her, she begs for a day to come clean, admitting that her secrets are really bad. The detectives have now confirmed that the apartment was last leased by Oliver St. Ledger, son of billionaire venture capitalist Casper St. Ledger, whose family business is based right in Narragansett, Rhode Island, the very town where Ciara's sister Shyla is seen walking past a Narragansett hardware store. The connection between these two families is no longer a theory. Oliver dodged a first-degree murder charge and has been cycling through identities ever since. The locals called him the Narrow River Killer. While they are discovering this in the future, Oliver and Ciara are busy making out in the past. The CCTV footage of the person who triggered the fire alarm at the start of all this shows a build that reads male, which has everyone leaning toward Oliver as the killer. Carl has his eye on Kevin Sullivan, the building's property manager, as the one who triggered the alarm and discovered the body. Given that Sullivan has access to every unit in the building and has already proven himself to be a terrible liar, Carl isn't buying his story. However, this show has been too careful and too deliberate with its misdirection for that to be the whole story. My money is still on Ciara being the one who finally ends him. The next day, Oliver wakes up to find Ciara in his shirt, and Ciara claims that that was why she was in his wardrobe last night. But Oliver is not buying it. He tells her straight up that if she's looking for the safe, it doesn't even belong to him. It just came with the place. He heads to work but makes the rookie mistake of leaving his laptop unlocked. Ciara wastes no time logging in and successfully transfers a staggering $100,000 to the Narrow River Memorial Fund. She calls her sister, Shyla, to celebrate. But she isn't ready to leave just yet. She wants to stay until the money clears in about 2 weeks. And she makes it clear that her work with the St. Ledgers is far from over. While Ciara is playing digital Robin Hood, Oliver is at the gym, and he finally spots Jane, the redhead who has been stalking him, taking photos. He calls the mystery number from the envelope, and when Jane's phone rings in her hand, the chase is on. He traces her all the way home and realizes she's been living in the same apartment complex the entire time. When he tries to confront her, she slips into the elevator, and Oliver completely loses it. He goes straight to her car and starts smashing it. The building manager, Kevin, catches the whole thing on camera, but instead of calling the cops, he offers to erase the footage for a price. In the present day, detectives Lee and Carl uncover a blog post that reveals a dark secret from Oliver's preschool days. A student named Paul Starling was murdered, and while a boy named Shane Martin was arrested for it, the rumors say Oliver was the real killer. The St. Ledger family has spent years erasing any mainstream coverage of the case, but the past is catching up. The detectives find Jane's number in the taunting letter she sent Oliver and realize she also lives in the building, but her voicemail is full, which is a major red flag that she might be the one in the bathtub. While waiting for a warrant, Detective Lee finally confesses her own secret. A low-level criminal named Linus Finch had been a suspect in a shootout, and even though he had an alibi, he tried to bribe Lee, the detective on the case. Lee rejected it and kept digging, but his alibi checked out. The problem is that, after the case closed, luxury gifts started showing up, and Lee kept them. She insists the only reason she reached out to Linus recently was because he lived near Oliver's building, and she thought he might have information. Carl is disappointed, but he's keeping it quiet for now. Ciara shows up at Oliver's office with lunch, most likely to snoop, even though he told her not to come to his workplace. She meets Elliot and tries to dig into Oliver's history, but Oliver is actually at home, having a breakdown over Jane. Ciara walks in on a session with his therapist and listens, as the doctor tells Oliver to stop being impulsive, reminding him that Oliver St. Ledger is his past, and that he doesn't have to engage with her. Oliver has been lying to his therapist, claiming he already broke up with Ciara, so things get awkward fast. Ciara slams the laptop shut, demanding that Oliver confide in her instead of a doctor who treats him like a kid. They have a major blowout, and Oliver storms out to confront Jane in person. He finds her apartment and insists he is Oliver Kennedy, not whoever she thinks he is. When Jane reveals she knows what he did, and he doesn't need to pretend, Oliver threatens her that if she knows what Oliver St. Ledger is capable of, then she would not be doing what she's doing. He eventually returns to Ciara and they make up, and later on Ciara confesses she was indeed looking in the safe, but she wasn't trying to steal from him but just get to know him more. When the warrant finally comes through, the detectives enter Jane's apartment. It's a mirror image of Oliver's unit, and it's registered under Elliot's name. Just when detectives Lee and Carl think they have their victim identified, the mystery does a complete 180. After entering Jane's apartment and discovering her investigation board on Oliver, Jane herself walks through the front door, very much alive. She reveals she's a journalist who has been building a case on Oliver for a long time. She's convinced he's a psychopath, that his girlfriend is a con artist who knew exactly who he was and stayed anyway, and that Oliver even had a hand in the death of Elliot's wife, Allison. But while Jane is giving her statement to Lee, Carl is doing some snooping of his own. He finds a mask and the exact coat worn by the person who pulled the fire alarm, leading to Jane's immediate arrest. Even though Carl covers for Lee regarding the Linus Finch situation, telling their boss Linus was just a witness on an old case, Lee is acting more suspicious. When they're supposed to meet at the coroner's office for the autopsy, Lee doesn't show. Instead, she gets into Linus's car, telling him to drive her anywhere. Something is very off. So in the past, Ciara knows Oliver is hiding something, and she wants him to confess to her. She convinces him to take more than his usual microdose of the psychedelic chocolate his therapist gave him, and they hit a St. Patrick's Day parade where they have the time of their lives until they run into Elliot. Elliot invites them to a pub for a drink, and Jane is there with Elliot's wife. Jane, as it turns out, is a journalist friend of Elliot's wife, Allison. We find out that Allison hates Oliver because she knows Elliot would never love her as much as he loved Oliver's father, and she brought Jane, who is struggling career-wise, to town specifically to dig up dirt on him. That also explains why Jane's apartment is registered under Elliot's name. While Oliver is away getting drinks, the women corner Ciara and warn her that he's a dangerous killer, but Ciara isn't rattled. In fact, she's more focused on the $100,000 she successfully laundered into her sister's account. Her sister is freaking out because she didn't expect that huge amount, but Ciara assures her that she has nothing to worry about because Oliver wouldn't even notice the money missing. And then she talks about Oliver, about how he's not who she thought he was, and how she could have a good life with him. She's out here drinking with educated, wealthy people instead of working at Denny's. Her life could get pretty good with him. What she doesn't realize, however, is that Jane is standing just outside the bathroom door, listening to every word. The moment Ciara steps out, Jane is right there. Jane tries to blackmail her, offering a fame and fortune book deal if Ciara helps her with her story and goes on the record. But Ciara isn't your average con artist. She grabs Jane by the throat and tells her she's bad at her job. She knows everything about Oliver, his aliases, everything he's done, and when he confesses to her, she will never be sharing it with Jane. Jane is left terrified, and it's clear that Ciara is the most dangerous person in the room. Oliver already knows the women would have told Ciara the truth, so he braces himself. Ciara asks him to tell her everything. He can't bring himself to do it. The last time he loved someone enough to open up completely, he was going to propose. He told her the truth, and she ran. He can't risk losing Ciara the same way. Ciara tries to create a safe space by putting earplugs in his ears and playing calming sounds while she whispers her true identity, Megan, and confesses her entire plan to him. She hopes that by coming clean he will do the same, but when he stays silent, she decides she's done. She goes home to pack her things, but just as she's about to walk out, Oliver arrives and finally agrees to tell her the truth. As for the death of Elliot's wife, it turns out it wasn't a cold-blooded murder. Oliver confronted Allison, and she ended up getting hit by a truck while trying to get away from him, a tragic accident that he's been blamed for ever since. But the biggest twist of all happens back at the coroner's office in the present day. Despite the police assuming the bathtub soup was a woman, the coroner confirms the body actually belongs to a man. Oliver comes clean to Ciara about everything. He tells her that he, Paul, and Shane Martin were all friends, but he was secretly jealous of Paul's charisma despite being richer than him. He claims they had a physical fight at the river, and that he simply watched while Shane drowned Paul. Ciara immediately sees through the lie and storms off, leaving Oliver confused. When she gets back to her place, her sister Shyla is already there with a gun and a plan to protect Ciara. She knows the St. Ledger family will come after them the moment they trace the stolen money, and she's convinced the only way Ciara gets out of this is by getting rid of Oliver for good. After a few days of total silence, Oliver starts spiraling because his life is empty without the girl he thinks he loves. He heads to her apartment only to find she is completely moved out and that no renovation was ever happening. He checks her office and finds out she never worked there, confirming his world is built on a deck of cards. He returns home and knocks himself out with propofol, but not before discovering Ciara's secret journal. While he's drifting off, Shyla is busy confronting his therapist, Dan Troxler. She bursts into his office, calls him a pedophile in front of his patient, and reveals that Ciara is actually her sister, Megan. It turns out Dan has a restraining order against Shyla, but she doesn't care. She wants him to warn Oliver to stay away. Dan tries to call Oliver to warn him that he's in a house with Shane Martin's sister, the very people out for revenge, but it's too late. Oliver is already high on drugs and passing out in the bathroom, just as Ciara walks in and picks up the phone to tell Dan he's far too late. In the present day, the drama in the precinct is just as messy as the murder investigation. We find out that Detective Lee wasn't being blackmailed for a crime. She was actually having a secret affair with the drug dealer, Linus Finch. When she tries to break it off to save her career, Linus threatens to expose her. Carl, having tracked her phone, shows up to save the day by beating Linus up and telling him to never threaten his partner again. Carl is beyond disappointed because Lee has spent months making him feel like the morally gray cop, while she hid her own terrible decisions behind his messy divorce. Despite the tension between them, the partners have to pivot back to the case. Now that the coroner has confirmed the body in the bathtub belongs to a man, the detectives are operating on the theory that Oliver is the victim. They head straight to the home of Paul's mother, believing that Paul's family finally came for the revenge they were owed after the St. Ledgers framed Shane for that drowning years ago. We finally see what happened when Paul was killed. Shane and Oliver are at their usual spot by the river, where Shane is venting about the financial pressure his family is under, half joking that he wishes he could have Oliver's life for just one day. However, Oliver's life is just as hollow. His parents are rich but absent, and he's essentially raising himself in an empty house. Shane has invited Paul along, and Oliver is already tense about it. Paul is a bully with a short fuse, and today his fuse is especially short. His parents are going through a divorce after his father cheated, and Shane's mother apparently told the whole town about Paul's mother being caught stealing from a supermarket. Paul starts mouthing off, calls Shane's mother names, and a fight breaks out. Oliver tries to break it up, but Paul turns on him and throws him to the ground. By the time Oliver recovers and gets back to his feet, Paul has dragged Shane into the water and is pummeling him. Oliver steps in to save his friend, but in a blind rage, he holds Paul underwater until he stops moving. Shane, being the loyal friend, actually tries to protect Oliver by suggesting they keep quiet, assuming the police would never look at Oliver because he wasn't even friends with Paul. But the guilt is a monster Oliver cannot handle. He calls his father, Caspar St. Leger, a man who treats morality like a business expense. And before the sun even comes up, Caspar has Oliver at the station, pinning the entire murder on Shane. This betrayal derails Shane's Ivy League future and lands him in handcuffs. The trauma of that night runs deep. Shane attacks Oliver with a pen at the station, and Oliver is so consumed by self-loathing that he uses a knife to carve a matching wound into his own stomach. When he nearly bleeds out at school, he is found by the counselor, Dan Troxler. Instead of helping, Dan sees a golden opportunity. He takes Oliver home, hears the confession, and uses it to blackmail Caspar St. Leger for years, becoming Oliver's private therapist while staying on the family payroll. The most tragic part? Megan saw Oliver drop Shane off the night of the murder and tried to tell her mother, but her mother thought she was just acting out for attention. The trial destroyed their family, and while Shane was in prison, Dan Troxler performed his most evil act. When Oliver eventually writes a letter to Shane, promising to make everything right, most likely working toward a full confession, Dan volunteers to deliver it personally, since Shane wouldn't see Oliver. Instead of reading the letter to Shane in prison, he uses his psychological influence to talk Shane into suicide, convincing him that he would only be seen as innocent if he died before his appeal. This leads to Shyla punching Dan in the face after discovering he was the last person to visit Shane, resulting in a restraining order, while Oliver's mind shatters into the anxiety-ridden mess we see today. Back in the present, Oliver wakes up from his propofol stupor to find Megan sitting by his side. The jig is up. He knows she is Shane's sister. Megan admits she came to Boston to ruin him, but after living with him, she realizes his hollow, drug-addicted life is already a living hell. Oliver finally gives her the one thing she needs, a real, unforced confession. He admits he killed Paul, and he admits he betrayed Shane. In a twist that only happens in a house built on secrets, they realize they are both broken by the same tragedy and profess their love for one another, deciding to move forward together. But the real world isn't letting them go that easily. Detectives Lee and Carl have finally tracked down Shyla and connected the dots that Ciara is actually Megan. Shyla claims she has no idea where her sister is, but as the detectives leave, a mystery shooter opens fire on Lee and Carl, trying to take them out before they can reveal the truth. The finale of 56 Days begins with Dan knocking incessantly at Oliver's door. And when Oliver opens it, the predatory therapist cannot hide his shock at finding Megan still there. He wants Oliver to get rid of her immediately, but Oliver finally stands his ground. He tells Dan that Megan knows every dark secret and stayed anyway, which is exactly why she is the only person who gets to stay in his life. Oliver realizes Dan has spent 16 years engineering himself as Oliver's only companion, just to keep the St. Leger money flowing, and he declares that the arrangement is officially over. Dan cannot have that, so he pivots to blackmail. He reveals he never delivered Oliver's confession letter to Shane, but kept it as a weapon. He threatens to release his session notes and the letter to the police, ensuring Oliver rots in a cell if his payroll stops. But Dan makes a fatal mistake by ignoring Megan. Proving she is Oliver's ultimate protector, she grabs a heavy decorative object and delivers a lethal blow to Dan's head. As his body hits the floor, the past and present timelines merge, with the medical examiner finally confirming that the bathtub soup is indeed the remains of the blackmailing therapist. With a dead body in the middle of a lockdown, Megan calls the only person she can trust, her sister, Shyla. Shyla provides a gruesome chemistry lesson, instructing them to use bleach and specific chemicals to accelerate decomposition in the bathtub, then litter the crime scene with evidences to confuse the detectives. Once the deed is done, Oliver finally surrenders the code to his safe, revealing a mountain of cash and passports. He packs it all into a bag and hands it to her, telling her to go say goodbye to Shyla while he goes to say goodbye to Elliot. After the goodbye, Oliver asks Elliot to drive him to the police station because he wants to confess. He doesn't want Megan spending the rest of her life on the run because of a tragedy he started 16 years ago. But Elliot, acting as his shadow father, convinces him otherwise. He tells Oliver that Megan is his one chance at a real life, something he hasn't had since the river. Megan is willing to go with him, so he shouldn't throw that future away. While Megan is waiting at the tarmac and we are assuming that Oliver has given himself up to the police, he arrives. But the country he wants them to go to, Megan doesn't like that, so she decides on another one. In the present, Lee concludes that Linus was the one who shot at her and Carl, because he isn't letting her walk away from their affair. With no other option, she comes clean to her boss Chief Russo about the relationship. And because she mentions Linus as a suspect on the current murder case, the case is taken from them due to conflict of interest and handed to an incompetent detective who doesn't look too closely. Earlier, when Carl confronted Linus, the dealer's signature chain dropped, and Carl picked it up. To protect Lee, Carl plants the chain in the murder investigation evidence. The new detective sees the chain and immediately concludes that Linus killed Dan, even though he didn't do it. Lee knows the truth. She had already correctly figured out that Megan killed Dan to protect Oliver, but she stays silent. In the end, 56 Days isn't a story about justice. It's a story about the lengths people go to for the ones they love, even if it means burning the truth to the ground. A few weeks later, Megan sends a $2 million check to her mother, finally ending the financial misery that started with Shane's death and providing a small piece of atonement for Oliver's guilt. The series concludes with a bittersweet victory. Jane's story is left frustratingly unresolved. She broke into the apartment, photographed the body, and triggered the alarm, and the show never really follows through on what happens to her after her arrest. Given that she could have denied the break-in but didn't, it's safe to assume that's what she was charged with, and that the real story she came to Boston to tell dies with the case. We see Oliver and Megan weeks later, living a quiet, happy life with a new baby in tow. The show essentially moved from a tense thriller to a love story where every character is morally compromised, kind of everyone deserves a second chance type shit.